Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, and welcome to a very special review today where I'm really excited to be taking a look at my very first 009 locomotive. As you can see, it's the newly released Small England from PECO and the Japanese company Kato, and my version is Prince in the maroon livery. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with 009, well, essentially it's the same scale as 00, but these are smaller narrow gauge style engines which run on N-gauge 9mm track, hence the name 009. These are the sorts of locos you'd find running at places like the Ffestiniog Railway or the Ffestiniog, and in fact it's the latter that Prince here is most commonly associated with. Now, you may be wondering why I've suddenly gone out and got myself a narrow gauge loco, and that's because I'm actually about to start work on a very exciting new 009 project, which hopefully you'll get to see sometime in the next few months. That said, if you want a sneak peek of what it is that I'm working on, I am sharing updates with my channel members, so definitely consider hitting that join button below this video on desktop if you want to see what it is that I'm up to. With that said though, let's get on with the review, and it has to be said that the popularity of 009 modelling has definitely grown in the last few years with the availability of more ready-to-run products coming to the market. Now, it was actually PECO themselves who started this in a way by bringing out their own range of narrow gauge rolling stock several years ago. Before this, pretty much everything had to be either built from scratch or a kit, but it's taken them quite a while to get round to making their first 009 loco. Now, in reality, this is a partnership between PECO and Kato, who I believe are well known for making N-gauge products out in Japan. As far as I'm aware though, this is their first 009 loco, and so it's going to be really exciting to see what they've come up with together. There are two versions of the loco currently available, both in the maroon livery with one named Princess and the other named Prince, which, as I said earlier, is the one I've got here today. The retail price for this is £150, with most retailers offering it for a bit lower than that, and in fact I picked mine up for £135. Now, this may seem like quite a high price tag for such a small model, but don't forget that 009 is still a bit of a niche market. One big disadvantage I can see already though is that this loco is not DCC ready. Now, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on, but that is a bit surprising given how common it is nowadays. So, with the basic info out of the way, let's take a look at the actual model itself, starting with the body. The saddle tank is essentially just one plastic moulding, but it does look very good, and we do have tiny details like the rivets that run up the sides. The one area where the moulding does fail slightly though is on the nameplate. It appears there's only one body moulding for the two locos released, and it is noticeable that the nameplate on Prince is quite long, presumably so that on the other version it's long enough to fit Princess on. Now, it's understandable that PECO and Kato wouldn't want to tool up a completely separate body just to adjust the nameplate, but could this not have been a separately fitted part? That would seem to be the logical thing to do. That said, it's only really noticeable when you look at it close up like this, so yeah, it's a compromise, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not really a big issue. The printing on the nameplate is very sharp though, as it is on the rest of the loco too. The maroon colour is done very well, and I think this is the livery that most people probably associate with Prince and the Ffestiniog Railway. To complement this, we also have nice black and white lining all over the side of the saddle tank, around the cab and the doorway too, and then also on the tender. We can also see a crest printed on the side here. I'm not entirely sure what this is meant to be though, if I'm honest. I thought the Ffestiniog crest was different, but perhaps this is an earlier version that I'm not aware of. It does seem to only be printed in one single colour, but like I said, I'm not familiar with this crest, so it may well be that it was just a single colour in reality. And as you may have seen a moment ago on the cab, we also have a couple of builder's plates on either side of the really quite narrow doorway. I don't think these are legible, but to be honest, I can't read that small anyway. Taking a look at the front of the loco, you can see we have a really nicely moulded smokebox door, as well as these nice separately fitted handrails that run over the top too. Moving down, we have a nice separately fitted vacuum pipe, and you might just also be able to see the tiny printed number 2 on the buffer beam. Speaking of the buffers, they aren't sprung. Now don't worry though, that's pretty normal for 009 locos, as the central buffers actually form the coupling too. Now this design is pretty much standard, much like the tension lock couplers are for 00 gauge, so you shouldn't have any trouble coupling to stock from other manufacturers. In the box though, you do get a pair of N-gauge couplings as well, as I believe that's what Kato uses for the Japanese market. The only other detailing part we have in the box is this. The tiny parts on the ends of the sprues are grab irons, the idea being that you use the lengthy sprue to get them into place and then twist the excess off afterwards. One of the places they're supposed to fit in is here, on these two columns either side of the smoke box, which I have to admit I'm not entirely sure what they are. The only other separately fitted parts I can see are the handrails that run along the side of the saddle tank. They are plastic rather than metal, but they are very finely moulded. And then of course there are the whistles attached up by the cab. Again, these are just plastic, and to my eyes they do seem just a little bit chunky in comparison to other parts of the Loco, but again this is only really noticeable when you're looking very closely. The cab also has the spectacle plate rims picked out in gold, and I do believe that each of the windows is separately glazed too, which is fantastic. Now looking inside the cab, it's very difficult to show you this, but essentially while there is moulded detail in there, as far as I can tell none of it has been painted or picked out. Honestly though, it's such an enclosed cab that I really don't think this is a huge issue. Yes, I know there are 009 Locos on the market that do have more decorated cabs, but then there are others that don't have any cab detail at all and it's just empty, so I think this is a nice middle ground really. And of course if it really does bother you, pop a driver figure inside and I doubt you'll be able to see past them anyway. One thing I do have to mention while we're on the cab though is that a lot of these Locos did turn up with the cabs detached and various other parts that had come off. And this seems to be mostly an issue with the packaging, which wasn't supporting the Loco properly, and I have to admit that even mine did turn up with the cab knocked slightly out of place. If this sounds familiar to you, then you might remember the issues that Hornby had last year with the release of their W1 Hush Hush. Now they came under a lot of fire from unhappy customers who had received damaged models, and so far I don't think we've heard a response from Hornby on that at all. In complete contrast though, the week after the Small Englands were released, PECO put out a statement that you can see on screen now, which basically says they're sorry to hear about the reports of models arriving damaged, and anyone who has received a damaged model should get in contact with PECO and they'll do what they can to put it right. And honestly, it's so refreshing to see a manufacturer act in this way rather than burying their heads in the sand and waiting for the problem to go away. Finally then, let's take a look at the tender. It's quite a small affair in comparison to the rest of the Loco, and again the interior is just a black moulding, but it's perfectly passable and I don't think any more really needed to be done here. There's also more of the black and white lining on the very back of the tender, with a larger number 2 printed here as well. And in case you were wondering, we do have tender pickups on this Loco, which should definitely improve the running and stop such a small Loco from cutting out so much. So that's all the detail covered, and seeing as I was just speaking about the running quality, let's take a look at that now. So seeing as I don't have an N gauge or a 009 rolling road, we're just going to run this up and down a straight section of track. But as you can see, Prince is a really nice little runner. It's got good slow speed, not the smoothest Loco I've ever seen, it does occasionally speed up and slow down, but I've found it perfectly fine when running at a realistic speed. At slightly higher speeds though, I have noticed that the Loco makes a little bit of noise. It's not an unhappy sound so much, it just sounds more like the motor is working a bit harder, but the point is that it's not completely silent. Now, as long as it's not doing any damage, that's absolutely fine with me, although I have heard from some others that their models are completely silent, and so maybe I need to have a look at the motor at some point and just check that it's seated properly. But generally, it's a really nice little runner, no major issues, and I think now it's time to see it pulling a train. So here we are, I've got a circuit of N-gauge track laid out on my desk, and as you can see, Prince is quite happily pulling around a short rake of slate wagons. I actually got these for a very good price from eBay, they're 3D printed, and all I've done is given them a coat of grey paint, and I think they really look the part. I do need to mention though that this Loco does have traction tyres, which I know won't be popular with some people. In this case though, I do think it's justified, seeing as 009 layouts can often have quite steep gradients on them. Obviously these Locos are very small, but we still want them to be able to pull a reasonable train, so I think this was actually a good decision from PECO and Kato. Now I know there's the argument about traction tyres wearing out in the future, and I do understand that. However, I also have Locos over 25 years old now still with their original traction tyres, and they work perfectly fine. For me though, I think the biggest issue with this Loco is that it's not DCC ready. A few years ago I would have understood that, but pretty much every new N-gauge Loco these days has a socket for a decoder, as do most of the 009 Locos I know of as well. I mean, even the upcoming Quarry Hunslets from Bachmann have a decoder socket, and those things are tiny. Now supposedly the reason for this is that in Japan DCC isn't really used as much, so I can understand why Kato thought it probably wasn't worth putting in. However, presumably a big part of the reason of why Kato and PECO partnered together was to bring this Loco to the UK market, where DCC is much more common. What's even more frustrating though is that they've released the chassis as its own separate product for those who want to create their own bodies to fit on these. Now that is a brilliant idea, and it's fantastic that the 009 community has a really good steam outline chassis to build on top of, but can you imagine if it had had a DCC socket as well? Look, I'm sure it's not going to be difficult to hardwire a decoder into this Loco. In fact, I imagine some bright spark has probably already done it. For me, it just feels like a missed opportunity that wouldn't have been hard to do. Minor gripes aside though, I do think that this is a fantastic addition to the 009 ready-to-run market, and it's really great to see more Welsh and Ffestiniog Locos starting to be released. Overall, I wouldn't say the Loco feels cheap or like it's been built to a budget, but it doesn't feel perhaps as high quality as some other 009 Locos I've seen. If Bachmann, for example, had taken on this Loco, I think we may have got a high-spec model, perhaps a die-cast body and a decoder socket, but then it probably would have come at a much higher price too, so swings and roundabouts. Like I said though, I do think this is a really good model, and it's nice to see that we're getting more options for ready-to-run Locos in 009. As you can see, it's already inspired me to have a go at a 009 project, and like I said earlier, if you want to see what I'm planning for that and get an inside look at the build process, then definitely consider becoming a member to see all the behind-the-scenes content. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. I do hope you've enjoyed my very first 009 review, and hopefully it's the first of a few to come. Do let me know down in the comments below if there are any other narrow gauge Locos you'd like me to take a look at too. And as always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. That's it for now though, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!